Time once again for Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling. Thank you so much for watching. Today I'm going to do something that's been done plenty of times. I've never actually done one before. A top 10 list. I've been watching a lot of WatchMojo.com, and they do top 10 lists on everything as suggested by fans. And it's a common theme, but I think there's a reason people do it. It's quick and it's easy and it can be a lot of fun. And I'd like to do it on a subject that I've never actually looked for online. I've never seen any videos talk about this online, therefore I don't have any preconceived ideas about how it should go. I want to do my top 10 list of my favorite EPs on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Now for newer fans, EPs is a concept that might need explaining. Maybe not, but where you have LP, when you say the latest LP by a certain band, that stood for long player, so that was essentially an album, a full-length album. EP is called extended play, which usually refers to a smaller group of songs, 4 or 5 songs. Whether it's put out by the record label in advance of an upcoming album, whether it's just a quick thing that they want to throw out if the band's on the road and they wanted some new product, or whether it's just a band only had so many good song ideas, they wanted to put it out, so they put it out as an EP. Usually they were priced cheaper than buying a full-length album, but not always. So I went through my music collection and looked at what I actually had for EPs. I've got some vinyl, I've got some CDs, I've got one cassette I'm going to show you too. So this is my top 10 list of my favorite EPs on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. So we'll start off, of course, at number 10. This is AC/DC, 74 Jailbreak. This came out in 1984 on Atlantic Records, and I'm holding the 1994 remastered CD version. This is a Canadian version. And though this came out in 1984, and that picture of Angus Young is definitely an 80s era picture, the music on here is all from 1974 and 1975. I'll explain why that is. There's the side of the disc right there. And there is the back cover. AC/DC's history with their early albums is a little bit confusing. The disc itself is cool. On the remastered ones, the Atlantic Records, they would put the red and green label, as would have been on the albums that came out at the time. I like when record companies do that. It's a subtle thing, but people like me obviously appreciate it. There's got to be more, or they wouldn't do it. Not much inside the CD booklet, just the lyrics to the songs. And the story with these songs, the early versions of the first few AC/DC albums in Australia are way different than the versions that were released in North America and in the UK. AC/DC's first 2 albums were released in 1974 and 1975. And they didn't see international albums be released until 1976 when they actually signed with Atlantic Records. So in Australia they were on Albert Productions, which was sort of, I don't even know if it was a label. I think it might have been something that Harry Vanda and George Young, a production company. Of course, they were AC/DC's early producers. They were in the Easy Beats. George Young is the older brother of Angus and Malcolm. So when they signed with Atlantic Records in 1976 and put out what we know as High Voltage, that was actually a compilation album from their first 2 albums, High Voltage and TNT. So in doing that, there were songs that got left off. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap was the next album to come out, although it didn't come out in North America till 1981. There were a lot of songs that got left off that were on the Australian-only versions of the AC/DC albums. Primarily, I mean, the best known one on here is the song Jailbreak. Most people know that song. They released the old video that came out with that too, and I remember Much Music used to play it. And even though I wasn't into AC/DC back then, I'd always watch that video because it was so old, and I wasn't used to seeing concept videos that were that old. So this is the first time many people in North America, unless you were really into the band and getting the imports, heard Jailbreak, also You Ain't Got a Hold on Me, Show Business, Soul Stripper, and really their first big Australian hit, their cover of the old blues standard, Baby Please Don't Go. Like Jailbreak, for instance, in Australia, that's on Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Baby Please Don't Go is from TNT. So this is sort of a catch-up album, even though there are still a lot of songs that didn't get put out. And it wasn't until I think about 6 years ago when they put out that gigantic box set, Backtracks, I think it was called, that they collected all of those B-sides, which I don't have because it's ridiculously expensive. I kind of wish they put out a single standalone disc of all those sort of forgotten songs. So that's my number 10 EP. At number 9, a band that doesn't get a lot of attention nowadays, but I really like them. They were really out of time in the early 90s when the grunge era hit. It's a Canadian band called Harem Scarum. And they came out in 91. Great melodic hard rock. Completely out of time. I think they were just a little bit late to the party. Although I think they did quite well in Japan, which is why this is a Japanese import that was brought over by Warner Music of Canada. This is called Live and Acoustic, and it came out in 1994. It's on Warner Music of Canada that brought it in from Japan. This is a combination of acoustic songs, live songs, and some radio edits to some of the material from the first 2 Harem Scarum albums. So there's what it looks like on the side, on that side. But you flip it over, it's obviously a Japanese import. Like I said, this is a great band, and I haven't listened to them for a long time. They were on hiatus for a while, but in the last couple of years they released a new album, and I've got to get caught up on their stuff because it's all quite good. This is what the CD itself looks like. And actually the version of the song Jealousy that's on here was originally from the album Mood Swings. It wasn't released as a single. The acoustic version was a single, and I worked in radio at that time, and I remember playing that quite a bit, the acoustic version of Jealousy by Harem Scarum. At number 8, of course, one of my favorite bands. I almost forgot about this EP. It's Journey. This is called Red 13. And this came out in 2002 when they had Steve O'Jerry singing lead vocals. Now, Steve O'Jerry did one album with them. Arrival came out in 2001. That was their last studio album on Columbia Records. It was their last new album on a major label. This is immediately followed the next year. They just threw this out on their own. It's a little experimental. Kind of sounds a little bit more like the stuff on their last studio album, Eclipse. I don't listen to this album that much, or this EP. It's got an intro and it's got 4 full-length songs. This actually came out with 2 different cover arts. I don't know if I've got the rare of the 2 or not. There's the back. Now the second to last song on here, Walking Away from the Edge, is sort of a half ballad. It isn't really a ballad at all. It's just a slower song. But I remember reading in on melodicrock.com, now this is something I've never heard a lot about. This is sort of a very inside thing. But evidently, when it became apparent that Steve Perry was not going to continue with Journey, following Trial by Fire, they auditioned a lot of singers, including Jeff Tate. Yes, Jeff Tate from Queensryche, and now his band Operation Mindcrime. How weird would that have sounded? I can't even imagine. I'm kind of glad it didn't happen. To me, that would have been like Gary Sharon and Van Halen, a great band with a great singer, but not great together. I don't know. It might have been great, but that would have been the end of Queensryche right then and there, so that would have been a shame. But Walking Away from the Edge was apparently a song they worked on together, but Tate is not given a credit on here, but it's just an interesting tidbit of information, especially if you're like me, a fan of Journey and Queensryche. That's the CD itself and a picture of the group. I always get this mixed up with Sammy Hagar's 1013 album, which he did around the same time. It was in 2000, because Red 13 sounds more like a Sammy Hagar album. Just the lyrics and credits inside this. And it's Journey, and I love Journey. This is fairly far down the list. It's just that I don't listen to it as much as the EPs that will follow, and I am trying to rank these on ones that I've listened to more than anything. At number 7, one of my favorite Canadian bands. I've seen these guys in concert. I've met them. This is Helix, Skin in the Game. This came out in 2011. That's signed by Brian Vollmer. I got this directly from planethelix.com, which is their own Helix website. And if you're going to buy anything from Helix, I'd buy it directly from them. Support the band, support Brian. Great guy. And he's very active on Facebook and other social media as well. This, I was a little late getting this. I think I just got it last year, as a matter of fact, but I've listened to the songs quite a few times because for the most part the songs appeared elsewhere. This has 5 songs on it. The first, yeah, 5 songs. The first of which is William Tell Overture. You know, they did that in concert. They started doing it in concert, so they recorded a version of it. Title song, Skin of the Game, which also, see, some of these songs appeared elsewhere. So of the songs that are on here, if they didn't appear on their best of 1983 to 2012, they appeared on the last Helix studio CD, Bastard of the Blues. But there is one song on here, other than the William Tell Overture, called Angelina, which it only appears here as far as I can tell. It's sort of a country-tinged song. I don't mean that in a bad way, but sort of like That Day Is Gonna Come. Best Mistake I Never Made. It's good when they do it. So that's got some good stuff on it. Helix are just a great band overall. So at number 6, I mentioned Queensryche just a little while ago. Actually, let's start off with vinyl. I've gone over this in my vinyl Queensryche episode, so I won't go into too much detail. This is the first Queensryche EP. Was their first release. Came out in 1982 on their own label, 206 Records, but this is the 1983 version on EMI, and I talked about this on my Queensryche TVC episode, one of my earlier ones. So this is the vinyl version of that. It has 4 songs on it. They were very heavy then, very Iron Maiden influenced. Didn't come out on CD until 1988, and this is the US version. It's not the remaster, but this is the initial CD version that came out. And they actually, when this came out, they did something that record companies would get right once in a while. They added a stray song. They added a 5th song in here called Prophecy, which is an old Queensryche song. It dates back to the beginning of the band. The version that's on here was actually recorded in 1986 for the Rage for Order sessions. And it originally appeared before here. It appeared on the soundtrack to The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, The Metal Years, which that had some curiosities on it. Like, that's got Under My Wheels, an Alice Cooper song with Alice and Axl Rose and Slash, and it's got different things on it like that. I think Megadeth is on there. That's the lyrics to the songs. And Queensryche now actually are more like this than they have been for a long time. They're kind of a heavy band again. So I really like that first EP. I don't listen to a lot of heavy stuff, but because they were always more melodic, I can get into that first Queensryche EP. So as the EPs continue. At number 5, Kiss themselves didn't do any EPs unless you count like international releases of singles that would have 4 or 5 songs, or there's samplers. I know there's a sampler they did called First Kiss, Last Licks. I don't have that. And those sort of record company only things or limited edition things, I'm not really considering those here. But I will say this. A lot of times EPs are among the first things to either not see CD release if a band's catalog is redone, or don't see re-release if the albums are remastered. So sometimes the EPs become very hard to find due to the limited nature, the fact they've only got a few songs on them. So unless one of these EPs produces a sort of a big hit, or as in the case of, say, Queensryche, it sells a lot of copies on the basis of what comes after it, a lot of times they sort of drop out of sight. Now, one of the rarest CDs I have in my collection, I'll start off with the album. This is a rare album. Anyway, it's Kiss related. This is why I mentioned Kiss. This is Frehley's Comet. Live +1. Of course, this is Ace Frehley's band, post-Kiss. This came out in 1988. It was recorded on tour for his first solo album, which was simply called Frehley's Comet. That's Ace in the middle. This is a 5-song EP. This is a Canadian version. It's still got plastic on it, but the side's open. I went over this in my Big Kiss episode too, so that's very rare. This is a Canadian issue of Live +1. It's equally rare on CD unless you found a remastered version. I don't even think I'd want to try and find it now in any form. But I managed to find, this is a US version of Live +1 on Megaforce Atlantic Records. This is one of the rarest CDs I own, actually. And this has some cool stuff. If you're a Kiss fan and never really listened to much of Ace's stuff, you'll recognize a few songs on here. Rip It Out, from Ace's 1978 solo album, which was the Kiss album, so it was one of those. Breakout, a song on the Frehley's Comet album, which was co-written by Eric Carr, which has the same riff that they ended up using on Revenge on Car Jam 1981. So it's a song idea that's existed for a long, long time. The second half of this, they do Rocket Ride from Alive 2. But another thing on here that's not live, the fifth song on here is a lone studio track. Great song called Words Are Not Enough, which should have appeared on a full-length Ace album. It could have been a hit single. It could have been a minor rock radio hit anyway. And this is just a fun thing to listen to. I'm not a huge fan of the Fraley's Comet stuff overall. Ace's solo period has some good songs here and there, but nothing that I really like all the way through. But I can listen to this Live +1 all the way through. So we're getting down to number 4 and another album that I've talked about before. Matt and I did a Skid Row episode. This came out in '92. Beside Ourselves. This is Skid Row's covers EP. Bought it mainly because they covered Rush on it. That wheezing you hear in the background is my cat Chloe, by the way. So we talked about this in the Skid Row episode. This is a fun collection of covers. If I ever had the chance to meet any of the members of Skid Row, I'd like to ask them what other songs they would have considered on a covers album, because they're really good at doing covers. So now we're getting to the ones that I listen to a lot. These are all ones that I've talked about before. Number 3, Kim Mitchell, his self-titled EP from 1982. The first thing that he put out after leaving Max Webster, after Max Webster effectively disbanded. This is a Canadian edition. I think it only ever came out in Canada on Anthem Records. Only 5 songs, good all the way through. You never hear any of these songs on the radio. None of these songs had videos that I know of, and this was just kind of a forgotten release, even though the next 2 or 3 albums that Kim did after this were really big in Canada. This hit the delete bins, and was never released on CD until 2004, when a company called Wounded Bird Records put it out. And Wounded Bird has done a lot of reissues. The story behind this goes that I did not buy this when it originally came out in 2004, and it was only available for a short time, and then it disappeared, and to this day has never been reissued. This CD holds the distinction, I don't know if I should be proud or ashamed to say this, of the single CD I've spent the most money on. I spent close to $80 to track this CD down, and I don't regret it, because I think that value has only gone up to get this, so I have these songs in digital form. I don't even think you can get them through iTunes, not that I would. So it's the same as the original album. So yeah, Wounded Bird, woundedbird.com, if you want to check them out. They may have some albums that you're looking for, or they may not, or they may no longer be available. The thing that I like about the Wounded Bird reissues, and the only other ones I have by them at this point, are a couple of, the first Vandenberg album, and that their catalog number system, they base it on whatever the original catalog number was. So Anthem's catalog number for this album was 5001, so it's WOU 5001. Worth seeking out. Really, really great. A lot of longtime Kim Mitchell fans don't even have it, because you just don't hear about it. Like I said, the nature of the EPs is a limited time thing. So now, number 2, my 2 favorite EPs. I talked about this earlier too. This is Rat's first EP, the first thing they put out. Came out in 1983 on their own Time Coast Records. This version I have, of course, is the Atlantic Records reissue. This is an unopened version I found of this. It was in the delete bins, as you can tell it's got a chunk out of it. This is so good. So heavy. It's heavier than anything that Rat ever did after this. Not that they were ever all that light, but there's just a toughness about this that's got great production, and every song on here I think just smokes from beginning to end. So this might be my single favorite Rat album. There's no filler on this. Because even the best Rat albums have some songs that I sometimes skip through. Not this one. Hard to find, and again, another hard CD to find. I eventually did get a copy. This has never been reissued. I don't think they own the rights to it. And I've been told, based on what I paid for this used, this is probably a counterfeit. But I'll tell you what, it's an extremely well done counterfeit, and it's good enough for me, if it is a counterfeit. I'll show you what the disc itself looks like. Like I said, if it's a counterfeit, somebody put some time into it, because it looks pretty authentic to me, and it works. Best of all, it works. So which brings me to my number 1 favorite EP. This is the one I've listened to the most, And it's one I obviously wish I had on album, but it's another rare album by probably a band that's bigger than any of these bands here, which makes it even more strange that it became unavailable. This is Metallica. The full length on this is the 598 EP, Garage Days Revisited. I talked about this in my Metallica cassette episode. This is a Canadian version of the Garage Days Revisited. This has the same 5 songs on both sides. Of course, they're all covers, and eventually they would get reissued on Garage Inc. I've listened to this cassette a lot. It would just play one side, get done, flip over to the other. The reason it was called the 598 EP is they were trying to make sure that the record company didn't overcharge. I don't think it worked. I think they charged whatever the heck they wanted. And this CD was unavailable for me for many, many years. I finally did track someone down that was willing to part with their copy. So here's the CD, the 998 CD. Yes, it says it right on the front cover and on the side. This is what the CD looked like. This is a Canadian version on Elektra, and one of my prized possessions as far as CDs go, not just Metallica, just because it's very, very rare. This, of course, has Last Caress, Green Hell, The Wait, The Small Hours. First thing that they recorded with Jason Newsted. With bass you can hear. And this is what the CD itself looks like. So I'd be curious as to what EPs you like. What EPs do you think I left off this list? And if you were to do a top 10 list, what would yours be? Would love to see you post in the comments. Thanks for watching another edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions.